Yeah. Come on, Dave, you should know this. You're our expert when it comes to Teams. Oh, it's already happened. Someone's doing it. There you go.
Yeah, it's recording
Mm-hmm.
looks like we're all here.
Okay, excellent. So over to Laura when you're ready.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if I've actually met many of you, so it's nice to see some faces to match up with names that I've seen around. My name's Laura Flower. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work within organisational development and staff wellbeing. And one of my projects has been to implement TRIM, or trauma risk management, across the trust. And I met with Debbie a couple of weeks ago and we had a bit of a chat about it and how it links really closely with the work that all of you have been doing around staff support and obviously talking to staff on a really regular basis, being involved with debriefs. So we agreed it might be helpful for me to just come along today to talk a little bit more about TRIM, with the aim of just giving you an understanding of what TRIM is. Hopefully it's something you can recommend to staff members if you feel it would fit. And then also just to consider whether any of you might be interested in becoming TRIM practitioners when we do some training in the new year. Nothing you have to decide on today, but just to give you a bit of food for thought, I wonder whether it's something you might be interested in pursuing, because we're really keen to have different representation from all across the hospital involved. So what I'm going to do, hopefully, is share a PowerPoint presentation. I'll probably whiz through it relatively quickly, because then most helpfully will be us just having a conversation really and being able to answer any questions or have a discussion around where it might fit. So let's hope that I can do this. So share window. Can you see a PowerPoint? Can you see? You can see PowerPoint.
Nope.
Oh. I'm very technologically challenged still, which is really frustrating. Okay, I think. Can you see it now?
It's coming by the looks of it.
Ray. The sharing is paused until you return to the shared window. What does that mean? I might not.
Sarah, have you got any idea as you talked me through this when I needed to do it for that session?
I'm going to stop and try again.
I don't know what you can see, Laura, but I remember whichever one has got the coloured border is the one that's showing.
Okay.
Or should be showing.
The coloured border. Window. Window. Screen. Okay.
So that should work. There we go.
Aha, can you see it?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, that wasn't too painful. Only a few minutes of okay. So for those of you that haven't heard anything about TRIM at all, it stands for Trauma Risk Management, and it is an evidence-based, peer-delivered support system. It was developed in the military and used quite widely across the military, and then has been also rolled out in the other forces. So the police, the ambulance service use it quite a lot. And the NHS, different trusts started using it over the last few years, but particularly since COVID, it's been picked up as a good system, a good evidence-based package, which we can provide for our staff in terms of support following any kind of exposure to traumatic events or incidents. It's absolutely not therapy, which I think it's sometimes confusing in that I'm a psychologist and I'm the lead on this, but anyone can become a TRIM practitioner. You don't have to have any background in therapy, counselling. It's just a safe and supportive conversation, and it partly takes the place of a traditional debrief. TRIM is set up as a risk assessment, but it is much more loosely a conversation with someone who has been through a traumatic incident to help to identify those who might be at risk of potentially developing PTSD, and just being able to provide people with signposting and the support that they might need following dealing with these traumatic incidents. So in terms of when to refer, I put this slide in, but actually I'm being quite general about it and saying, actually, following COVID and all the trauma that people are experiencing repeatedly, it doesn't necessarily need to be one particular incident that triggers a TRIM. It could just be that sense that actually a team or an individual needs that opportunity, that space to have that supportive conversation, someone that can listen to them non-judgmentally, which I'm really aware saying this. I know that's something that you guys all do as well, and you all do fantastically. I get amazing feedback from the teams that I work with around the support that chaplaincy have offered during COVID. But this is sort of an added extra as well. So if you're talking to people and they have been through particular incidents, like listed here, or just more generally you're slightly concerned that they might be developing kind of symptoms of PTSD, that might be a point where you think, well, you could suggest TRIM or come and chat with me or the Wellbeing Hub and see if you think this might be something that could be offered. So I'm sure you can read that on the screen yourself and you don't need me to read it out. So the TRIM process here at HHFT is very new. It's still very much in its infancy. We've now had 4 referrals since we properly started, kind of end of September, and starting to build a little bit more, and we're starting to do a lot of comms around it. But the process is that I said managers contact the Wellbeing Hub, but it doesn't have to be managers, it can be anybody. So we're trying to use the Wellbeing Hub as a single point of contact so that referrals don't get lost by going to individuals. So an email or a phone call just saying it would a TRIM be considered and requesting a TRIM. And then the people involved in the incident will be contacted and offered it. It's all voluntary. We never go in and say you have to come now. We've been told that you experienced this incident and we think you need a TRIM. That is absolutely not how this works. It's very gentle. It's very much, this is what's on offer. We'll give people information about it and say if there's something you want to opt in with, then you can. So yes, the TRIM conversations are purely voluntary, and we really aim to try and do them within work time, if at all possible. We try and encourage, if it's following an incident, that the conversation takes place about 72 hours to 7 days following an incident. And those conversations can either be individual, so if people want to talk individually, or small group based, if that feels more appropriate or that's what the team are asking for. TRIM then follows up 28 days later just to check in how people are doing and what's going on, and that's the point where really would be starting to look for signs of PTSD and then thinking about if people need to be referred on. And the conversations normally take about an hour. We allow about an hour just to give people space to talk through, and just rather than sort of trying to rush people through, we say have this hour, which is your opportunity to share. Don't know if we really need this slide when I said I was going to rush through. So this is just a rough outline of what the TRIM process supposedly looks like. There's the initial, what they call site management, which is issue identified. Ideally, so this is if we're looking at it following a specific incident. So, you know, say traumatic cardiac arrest on ward, we're contacted as the TRIM team. Ideally, within about 24 hours, you'd have a planning meeting with one of the matrons or nurse in charge on that day to talk that through, think about who was involved, who might benefit from having a TRIM intervention. We can also provide TRIM briefings quite early on, which would be jointly with a member of the team who was involved in the incident, probably quite a senior member who can run through the basic facts. And then in the TRIM briefing would just be doing some reassurance, education, signposting, and offering the opportunity for people to sign up to, if they want to have these TRIM conversations. Then after 3 days, we'd be aiming to do an initial, it's called a risk assessment, but I tend to call conversation. We'll follow up 1 month later. And normally that's where this ends, but there will obviously be some cases where we think, okay, actually it would be helpful for them to be followed up again in 3 months. So in terms of who the TRIM practitioners are, we've got volunteers from across the trust, really keen to have all disciplines, all sorts of grades, and as much variety as we can, really. And everyone's been externally trained and accredited by a company, they're called Strong Minds Resilience. They are military based, but they're fantastic. You know, a lot of the training you can see comes from the military setting, and we've had to do some work around that. And I'm thinking, how do we apply that to our trust? But it's a good couple of days training. And all TRIM practitioners are expected to work to and abide by a code of conduct and confidentiality. So within the trust, we have this organisational structure, which is a little bit fuzzy at the moment. I'm supposedly the TRIM coordinator, although I'd quite like to try and get somebody in to do that as more of an administrative role, but that's a battle I'm yet to fight. So I'm kind of coordinating, overseeing TRIM within the trust. We also then have TRIM managers. There's 5 of us at the moment across the trust, and we hope to train up some more. And then we have our TRIM practitioners. So at the moment, we have 23 trained across the trust. So this isn't exactly fitting with this meeting, but I'll share it anyway. So in terms of where you come in, we need support across the trust for it to be credible, for people to be aware of TRIM, to start referring in, and just be able to have those conversations with staff around whether TRIM might be something that fits for them. And I think it is correct to say that you are the eyes and ears on the ground. As I said already, I've heard such great things about the availability of the chaplaincy team and those kind of just very gentle and informal conversations that have been able to be had. So actually, if you're hearing about those traumatic events and recognising there's an impact on staff, then you'll be in a really helpful position to be able to signpost them or to contact us and think about whether that might be a route for support. I think it's fair to say we all know we need a bit of a change of culture, and I've been working on this throughout for the last 18 months and banging the drum as hard as I can in trying to be more proactive, getting people early support rather than just waiting until down the line when everyone's on their knees and everyone's off sick. We really want to kind of make sure that, and hopefully doing this sort of TRIM work, we hope that we see people, we have those conversations. Actually, at the 1 month follow-up, they follow that natural course that we see with trauma, in that they're starting to do a little bit better and off they go. But equally, it's very helpful to be able to pick up those that aren't, and to be able to offer that support early rather than waiting till 6 months, a year down the line where people are really, really struggling. So I've got this slide in here about, there's a bit of confusion around what teams are offered, because we also do offer something called care spaces as well. And just to clarify that care spaces are more of a sort of reflective opportunity just to share, ideas, reflections, difficulties, challenges as a team. And they're quite different to TRIM in that TRIM follows quite a what's the word? You can tell I haven't had lunch yet. It follows a manualised process. It's much more formal, whereas a care space, when I run those, they're much more of an open discussion, reflective space. They're not normally following an incident. So there is a difference, but that's not up to you to, have to think, oh gosh, what do I recommend here? You come to us and we can have that discussion with yourselves or with the teams or with those individual staff members to work out what might fit the team best. So we'll just finish off with my Wellbeing Hub signage, which you've probably seen plenty of. And then I will come back and we can... I will try and come back anyway. Am I here? Hooray! So I hope that wasn't too much of a whistle-stop tour. I don't want to kind of over... It's a very simple process and it's really not anything that's kind of rocket science or needs too much explanation. But I didn't know if anyone had any questions or comments or suggestions or anything really for me around TRIM.
I've actually got 3 questions, Laura, which is pretty bad as we discussed this a couple of weeks ago.
Maybe you had time to think about it since our discussion. So that's good.
So obviously, if chaplaincy was referring a team or an individual for TRIM, it would be obviously with that person or that team's permission. And I'm just wondering, is that the actual policy, the format throughout the trust? Or are you encouraging people to make recommendations without the individual or the teams knowing about it?
So I'm always encouraging permission. I think you start off on a really bad foot, don't you, if you don't have that individual's permission to share. So, for example, yesterday I had a conversation with one of the ED matrons who had a number of things she wanted to discuss with me, a number of incidents. And a couple of them, the staff members had actually gone to her and said, we need support. So they'd already kind of given their consent and said, look, we're asking for this. So she was able to, I then took their names and could take it forward. There were others that hadn't. And so I said, okay, that you've got the information now, you can go back to them and say, this is what's on offer. And then that's their choice, whether or not their information is shared with me. And I would say the same with you guys. If someone's, unless they give permission, then no, absolutely not. So
thank you. Another thing that I'm thinking about, and this is always the tricky one, it's the confidentiality and record keeping, because it's almost a fine line, isn't it? We need to have records, you need to be able to prove what you're doing, you need to have the follow-up. But one of the things that we come across is staff not wanting to go into the system and wanting to have chats with people. So where does the information go? How identified are the teams and the individuals who receive a TRIM intervention?
We hold fairly basic information, and I'm still, this is very early days, and because we've only just started doing them, I'm on this line between, are we getting enough? Are we recording enough? But at the moment, it's fairly basic. So it is who the team is, what the incident was, who's kind of consented to be involved, what they're having, whether it's one-to-one or group. And then we just simply record their risk assessment scores, which if you do the TRIM training or look into it, you see that there's a sort of a 10-point risk score, which looks at the different areas that people are struggling in. So on the actual paperwork, you've just got 1 to 10, and then 0, 1 or 2. So it's fairly basic information, and it's stored at the moment. We're storing it within staff wellbeing as we do the confidential counselling sessions. But I'm always up for review and conversations with information governance and things around where it's best stored.
Because staff will ask if their line managers are going to be told about it. Are the exec going to know their names and the departments that are going? So are you going to be saying, for example, oh yes, this month we've done 10 trim interventions with ITU at Basingstoke, for example?
In theory, yes, but I will always say if a team or an individual do not want that information shared, then we will not share it. If I sometimes get individual contacts from staff members that will say, I want to get some support, but I don't want to ring the Wellbeing Hub because I know X who works there, and I don't want that conversation to be had. I don't want my name on record. So then we have to find ways around it to make sure that people can still get that support. And we can. You know, there's no reason whatsoever why it has to be reported back. I think if you've got the consent of the team and it's very vague information, like, yeah, critical care of had this trims, great. If they're not happy for that, then I think we can report it in a different way.
Thank you. And my very last question, I know this is a little bit difficult, but you said there's 23 practitioners at the moment. Do the individuals and the teams have a choice in who the practitioner will be? Because this is, again, a very sticky point of relationships and who people want to talk to. And I know it's a bit complicated, but I'm just wondering how that works.
We haven't got to that point yet in that anyone said, I don't, well, actually, no, that is not true. Without kind of giving too much information, we've had one person who's trained and a team has said, I don't think would be comfortable with that person doing trims. And so I haven't had the courage to go to that person and say that, but I've dealt with it in that because I'm coordinating it. When there's been things raised, I just have kind of avoided the context. The process happens at the moment is that a referral comes in, I contact up to the trim practitioners and say who's available, and then we allocate in that way. But of course, if someone's come forward and said, I don't want someone in my department. Oh, ED yesterday, they said that the request has been that someone outside of the department. So we've got a few people who are trained in ED. So I would kind of say not them. Other times it might be they say, actually, we want someone that does know how we work in the department. So yes, I'm very much for, you know, I'm a big believer in we need to offer what the individual or the team wants rather than what we think is a firm formal process. And I will do my very best to always, you know, to be able to provide that. And luckily we've got such a spread, I think, that we can do that. And it might be that we'd have to go back and say, oh, you might have to wait that week, you know, because actually the only person that's available this week is that person. But hopefully that would be okay.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. I'll be quiet now and let other people talk.
Okay. Mark, I can see you've got your hand up as well.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that presentation, Laura. This is a selfish question just from me, really, just because I'm an honorary chaplain. So I don't even come up every week at the moment. As Debbie knows, I work with Father Anthony here, one of the Catholic priests here. So just a couple of things. Will there be notes shared that I can then talk through with Father Anthony so I can share that with him? And then I'm also thinking, because I'm not coming in all that regularly, it could be 6 months' time when I come across my first example of somewhere where this needs to be put in place. Who's the best person for me if I'm a bit rusty on what the process is to check with? Is it to go via Debbie or one of her team, or is it to come to you and just say, look, I've had this, I'm not sure, should I be following this up, and just talk that through with someone? So thank you.
Okay. So your first question is, I think we're recording this, so that should be able to be shared, which is
brilliant.
And I mean, Debbie is very much in the loop, aren't you, Debbie, with what's going on in terms of well-being? So I think it's either going to Debbie if she's happy with that, or I'd always say if you contact the Staff Wellbeing Hub, just because it's a single point, not 9 times out of 10 what they do is just forward on the email regarding trim to me. It's just so that, you know, I'm not a single point of failure, really. You know, if I am on leave or off sick or, you know, get knocked down by a bus, hopefully not, but then it doesn't get completely lost if people come directly to me. So I'd say go either have a discussion with Debbie, go to the hub, and we'll be able to tell you what's going on at the moment. or at that time if it's 6 months down the line. So, and hopefully 6 months down the line we'll be able to say, well, Trim is flourishing and going really well. I hope.
Lovely, thank you. Just following up, sorry, do you see this as a long-term thing, or do you see this as running for a couple of years and then hopefully we'll be post-COVID stuff, and is it much broader than that?
Yeah, I see it as a long-term thing. If you are to ask me personally, and I've felt passionate about this for years, way pre-COVID. You know, I've always really strongly believed that our staff can benefit from some extra support, and are often so many people just think this is just what I need to cope with, and you know, seeing this this amount of trauma and going through this, that's just part of my job, and it's absolutely not. You know, everyone is human. So I see it as a long-term thing. I feel incredibly passionately about it. I don't think I'm going to let it go anytime soon unless I get completely beaten down. But there's no guarantee. I mean, I'm on a secondment and my post is due to end in March. I'm starting to sort of beat them with a slight stick already and saying, if this wants to continue, it needs to go on. So hopefully, yes. It should be. It should be something that's around, and I'm hoping that COVID will have, you know, will leave a legacy of that improved kind of recognition of staff's needs and support. But we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Anyone else got any questions or comments?
Do you see this primarily dealing with sort of trauma happening in the work environment, or is it also traumas that are happening in people's private lives?
That's a tricky one. We are primarily focusing on traumas in the workplace, but it doesn't have to be. So examples where Trim has been used, not just within this trust, but more generally across other trusts I've worked with, are things such as death of a colleague. There's been suicides within teams. So that kind of ebbs more. It's not a personal thing. It's still a professional thing as well. There's the double-sided. But yes, there is that work element to it. Otherwise, and I think we have to kind of hold that boundary in a way, because otherwise we could end up taking on probably a lot more than we can manage. I mean, maybe long term, if my dream ever comes true and we get loads of funding and we get lots more people trained up and we have a great resource, that would be wonderful to be able to provide. But at the moment, sort of less so. I think it's always worth a discussion, though. I'm not completely ruling it out. It's worth kind of coming back and saying, if someone's saying, I really need some support with this and I'm just not getting anywhere. And often personal things are affecting people's work anyway. So, I'm giving a bit of a politician's answer here. It's not a yes and it's not a no, but I think it's more, we are trying to focus on the workplace stuff where possible. Anything else?
I think I'd just make an observation that you talked about the coordinator role perhaps being more admin. I would almost say yes and no, because I can see that if it's just someone who's doing a purely admin role of allocating people, then some of the answers to the questions that you gave me aren't going to happen. And it always almost needs to be somebody with that level of understanding and experience and training who is going to be perhaps coordinating and ensuring that this works correctly. So
what I would love, Debbie, what my dream, but I'm waiting till they actually give me a permanent job before I start waving around too many of these dreams in public, is to have someone like what we call sort of an assistant psychologist, so somebody who doesn't necessarily have to do that, but someone with that kind of passion, that understanding. Also, they'd have to be Trim trained themselves, so you couldn't be a Trim coordinator unless you'd gone through the training. And I would be very conscious about who was being selected for that. but I think there's a bit of a pipe dream at the moment. As it stands, I will continue to be the coordinator until such time as we have a bit more investment.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for all your comments. It's really helpful, Debbie, to sort of have those conversations and to get ideas, and just gets you thinking as well about, you know, how we kind of present this to the trust. You know, the questions you were asking about, that confidentiality and who people can pick, that sort of thing. I think it's so important, because sometimes those choices feel like they get taken away a little bit, people, and I don't want that to be the case. Thank you. And of course, if anyone's interested in training to become a TRIM practitioner, do let myself and Debbie know. I haven't booked the next lot of training yet, because I'm just mindful of how things might be over the winter in the trust. So I'm thinking probably late February, March, optimistically, if things are a little bit calmer by then. But I'm just, you know, I'm not rushing into anything just yet. But I do have a list of people who have expressed an interest. So if you are interested, let me know and I can pop you on the list. And it doesn't mean you commit to anything. It will just be a case of I'll then email once we have dates and say, if you're still interested, then we can put forward for it. Okay.
I think that's been really helpful, Laura. So thank you very, very much for sharing that.
It's nice to sort of meet you all on screen, and thank you.
Okay. All right.
Any questions, just, you know, let me know, or come through the Wellbeing Hub. But, you know, I am around at the moment. I'm not on any leave. I'm hopefully not going to be hit by a bus. So, you know, do just email me if you have any questions that pop up after today.
Brilliant.
All right.
Thanks. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.